Hello there, everyone. I'm Diane Hodiak, Executive Director of 350 Deschutes, and I'd like to welcome you to the 5th Annual Go Clean Energy Conference. And we will start shortly after my announcements with the Build Back Better, the new culture coming out of the federal government, how that affects businesses, as well as how to work together, businesses and government, on sustainable partnerships. First, I'd like to thank our generous volunteers, speakers, moderators, and sponsors that include Pure Light Power, Ledge Capital, Pacific Power, Deschutes County Solid Waste, Energy Trust of Oregon, G5, Neil Kelly National Car Charging, MindClick, First Interstate Bank, and Republic Services. A special thank you to Amy Perez, our web designer, and Set in Motion Marketing. Please honor our sponsors by honoring them with your business, as they have been very generous in making this free conference possible. You can learn more about them by visiting the expo page at the gocleanenergy.org website. And I'd also like to remind everyone to make sure to register for Zoom for the following panels. You will find that at gocleanenergy.org and click on schedule at the top of the page, and you will see the Zoom links that you will need to register for. And I see that our very on top of it tech people have just put that link into the chat, where we will be putting other links if you want us to share those. Now, this is true even if you have registered prior to this in the pre-registration program. Today, we will have Q&A after all of our speakers at the end of the presentation. I encourage you to put your questions into the chat and or into Q&A to alert our panelists that you have a question for them. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to John Rook of the SOAP Group as our moderator for this program today. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Diane. I just want to do a quick check. Everyone here and hear me, I assume. Maybe some, if not, you can message me and let me know. So this is an exciting panel for us. We are going to be looking at business and government partnerships. It's a big, hairy topic. So we're going to try and focus on 3 major areas of it today. We're going to talk about how you engage the business community as a municipality. We're going to look at some success stories, and then we're going to get into the weeds a bit and learn more about contracting and public-private partnerships. So to kick this off, I'm going to start our presentation looking at engagement and how do we engage the business community as municipalities. I should, at every business meeting, I have to start with, we are in Portland, Maine, not the other second Portland that came after us. So if people come in late and start expecting me to speak very knowledgeably about Portland, Oregon, I'm going to be in trouble and they will be embarrassed, because I'm speaking from an East Coast perspective around building community and engagement, specifically around sustainability. And there are 4 major things that we look for. But first, let me give you a little bit of background about my company. My company is called the SOAP Group, and it stands for Sustainable Organization Advocacy Partners. We've been around for about 20 years, specialized consulting at the intersection of sustainability and culture. I'm the author of a couple of books. First one is called More Than Promote, which looks at marketing programs in the sustainability space that are actually part of the solution to the problem and not just marketing. A great simple example is Tide laundry detergent. Tide had a program called Loads of Hope, where they would bring tractor trailers into communities that had been hit hard by natural disasters due to climate change. They would roll up the walls of these trucks and simply do laundry for people. Great way to promote their product, right on brand, but it was also part of the solution for people who were stuck in these disaster areas. And the second book is a collection of essays called Eco-Hegemony. And it is a collection of essays about how sustainability appears inside of pop culture, specifically movies. if you think about all the natural disaster movies that are very popular these days, 90% of those natural disasters are referenced in the movies as a result of climate change. Perhaps the most famous or infamous would be a movie called Sharknado, which was an interesting moment for sustainability because sustainability was the punchline to the movie. The whole movie was a punchline, but they referenced sustainability specifically and climate change specifically as the reason that these sharks were being sucked up into tornadoes. So anyway, a couple of books out there. Both of them are out of print. Send me an email, I can get you a copy probably. A few of our clients, we work for company Google, Cliff Bar, Interface, Carpet, Subaru, a bunch of schools and institutions and cities and towns. So, like I said, there's really 4 steps for municipalities and government to engage the business community. And step 1 is what we call a culture map. It sets the tone for where are we starting from. So if we were to do a sustainability project for a corporation, the first thing we might want to do is to figure out where they are. What is their current footprint? So we want to do that with the culture of the city and town as well by looking at their businesses. So how do we do this? We do surveys, we do interviews and roundtables with residents and local business owners. And here's what we're looking for. We want to understand their climate change belief systems. Do they believe it's human caused? Is it fake news? Is it reversible? Do their customers care about sustainability and their actions around climate change? What specific local climate change impacts are already visible to them, and can they imagine any as well? So while they may not be feeling an effect of climate change yet, can they imagine it? And what do they think those effects might be? Lastly, are they already taking any climate change actions? And then what are the barriers? And there's 4 barriers that always pop up. There's time. I don't have time to measure my footprint or to deal with this. I'm a small business owner, and this is the last thing I need to deal with. Money is certainly a factor if it's going to cost them money at the outset. Their own ideology can get in the way, and they may not have the tools to do what the municipality is requiring of them. What we like to do from there is define 3 or 5 business personas and start grouping business together so that we can message to them and communicate with them specifically based on where they are. And we can think about these as we've got action takers, maybe early adopters. We've got people who are maybe not doing a ton, but they're advocates for the idea. Rule followers, these are the people who may not love an ordinance, but will follow along simply because they are rule followers. We've got reluctant participants and then deniers. And our ultimate goal here is how do we move these people or businesses progressively up the ranking so that everybody is an action taker at some level. This culture mapping often, again, we're doing a lot of interviews and surveys and communications, one-on-one communications with business owners. It gives us an opportunity to share what the municipality has already done and maybe disclose some of the existing known footprints of the city. It's also an opportunity to demonstrate collective impact, and I can't overemphasize the importance of demonstrating collective impact when you're talking specifically to small businesses who think that their electricity and water bills don't amount to a hill of beans compared to maybe larger manufacturers or other businesses in town. So that's step 1. And what it results in. Well, we have an understanding of where the business community is along that spectrum. We understand what they believe now. And again, behavior change has to be based in some sort of belief system or change in belief system. We get to learn what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do. What incentives or disincentives, that dreaded benchmarking ordinance that has seemed to be popular a few years ago before pandemic. But what incentives and disincentives are required for progress? Gives us a map of the business needs. So as a government entity, we can then go out and outsource those tools and supply the correct tools for the businesses. And it gives us an opportunity to set very realistic benchmarks and goal setting. And lastly, it gives us strategic messaging based on the business personas. We want to meet people where they are and then push them forward. So step 2, developing strategies and targets. This is the where are we going part of the 4-step process. So using the map, we define multiple strategies to engage the individual businesses, again, based on where they are. We share municipality benchmark data as well as progress projections. We want to show reduction in footprint. We want to show cost savings. We want to start to demonstrate best practices. So leading by example. So the city is already doing this. Now we're going to ask the business community to engage. We want to align or realign expectations based on the realities of the culture map. Do we need to regulate or not? We create business working groups from all of the business personas. We want to have all of these personas represented in our working groups. And then we begin talking about current and future state of the municipality's footprint and the business community. And what we're looking for there are layups and long shots. We do want to set aggressive goals, but we want to engineer some really early wins. And so going through this culture map process demonstrates where those early wins could be. This gives us a kickoff opportunity for a forward-facing community dialogue that shows a program that's a reflection of the community. So it's not being brought in from outside. This is a reflection of the community, very important. A demonstration of leadership, revealing the municipal footprint and an impact so far. It gives us an action plan and realistic goals and not fluff. So how do we get there? This is plans, visions, and tools, step 3. We end up with a plan with very actionable steps and targets and motivating messaging, or perhaps regulations that can be motivating as well. So what does success look like? How will it impact the local economy? And most importantly, how will it impact the businesses? And what tools? And that could be from a regional marketing perspective. It could be from attracting new customers perspective. But if you remember back to the culture mapping piece, we're already trying to understand, do these businesses, do their customers care about their footprint? Are they thinking about it? And if so, what greater value can we gain by sharing their footprint or helping them share their footprint to their customers? And then ultimately, and maybe most importantly, we've now start to understand what tools are needed for the business personas to get involved and move forward. So here are some of those tools that can be offered up. Spreadsheet templates, to which we usually say boo, because formulas break, data becomes really very questionable, but it's a tool. It's a tool that can be used. It's a free tool that can be used. Perhaps providing software access, a little bit more reliable data inside of software. Administrative support for managing this data. And I would argue that most municipalities need to plan for more administrative support than you expect. We did a project for a city here near Portland, Maine, and we had some small businesses that there were language barriers. And so we actually had administrative support entering in their utility data for them, or they claimed they didn't have time and so they wouldn't do it. So I would just urge you to plan for a little bit more, or maybe a lot more administrative support than you might expect. Other tools, dashboards. We want visual validation that things are happening, that things are being measured, maybe even some gamification, right? And that can be simply in the form of comparing businesses, and it doesn't have to, it can be anonymous. It could be a manufacturer compared to a pizza parlor, right? But start to have some play around with the idea of gamifying this through the visualization of data. And then business visibility and incentives. What marketing support would really help people get on board? Things like, green listings, or perhaps even ranking. That can often backfire, but we've seen it done successfully, where you rank businesses based on actions they've taken or progress. Lastly, things like marketing support, developing window cling programs, or possibly even things like tax incentives. Again, these are tools to get people engaged and to help them start to make progress and move forward along their path. Step 4, we want to demonstrate progress as soon as we have it. And this is the lather, rinse, and repeat part of this process. We want to develop easy wins and celebrate them quickly when they happen. This is about giving high fives to everyone, to anyone who makes progress. We want to take those wins, turn them into best practices, and share them with the community. You can think about this almost like an Amazon recommendation engine where, you know, if you're on Amazon, it's people like you who've also bought the following products. Well, based on our culture mapping, we have a pretty good idea of what the businesses are like, how many employees perhaps they have, how many square foot their buildings occupy. Well, we can look at the best practices that are coming out of any program and say, hey, look, this would also apply to these 12 other restaurants in town. So let's really make specific recommendations to them that they should look at doing these best practices that have resulted in not only an environmental footprint reduction, but possibly even cost savings for the other businesses. Displaying progress in public dashboards is a big one. You know, maybe it's on a municipal website. Here's the footprint of our city. These are our municipal buildings, and these are the footprints of the businesses that have joined our coalition to measure their own footprint. Perhaps even putting them inside of building lobbies, public building lobbies, local businesses' websites, and then getting the business community to share this information with their customers. And again, a lot of this is really about timing and pacing. And so we want to push the conversation at the pace dictated by the culture map. The result for this is a municipal sustainability engagement plan that respects the local community. It's inclusive, it's realistic, and it's manageable within the existing resources, and it's also repeatable. So in summary, four bullets. Understand the community in their own words. Don't assume you understand the community, because every community of business owners has a multitude of different types of business owners. I live in a fairly progressive, probably the most progressive part of Maine. And when we've done this for local communities here, we always find a cohort of deniers that are business owners that we want to engage. We want to hear what they say. So listen. Second, design the program to fit that community. Third, provide businesses support where needed, regulate where required. Support them on the journey. If you're going to develop an ordinance or set some bars and objectives, you need to provide the technical support and perhaps even consulting support to help the small businesses, the businesses in general. And fourth, make progress visible and part of everyday life. Try and embed it in as many touch points as you can with consumers around the city every day, and to make this a part of celebrating success and celebrating progress. That's what the visibility strategy is really all about. So thank you very much. I am going to hand this over to Joanne from MindClick.
Thank you so much, John. That was great. And please, somebody indicate for me if you can't hear me for some reason. Otherwise, I will dive right into it. I'm excited to be here today and speaking with all of you. Thank you for joining and spending the hour or so with us. I lead MindClick. MindClick is actually headquartered in Bend, Oregon. I happen to be coming to you from Chicago, where I'm attending one of the architecture and design industry's largest conferences. And it is lots of conversation around what I'm going to share with you now, but a little bit of background around MindClick. We rate the environmental and social impacts of manufacturers and their products. Our data and analytics that come out of those ratings empower purchasing decision makers to ultimately buy better, and empowers the manufacturers themselves to improve on this journey of environmental and social responsibility. And it is a journey. So what I'm going to be talking about is a perfect follow-on to what John was sharing with you. And it's that we're going to talk about the impact that the White House and Wall Street are having on Main Street businesses, and what that means for all of us as consumers, both in terms of consumers who are buying products, but also consumers who are investing in these companies, publicly traded companies, and having information where we can actually make an impact by our choice of where we're putting our investment dollars. So let's go ahead and dive in. So there are going to be three topics that are covered during today's presentation. The first of which is this transition from an orientation that's been focused almost exclusively on financial profit versus stakeholder profit. Stakeholders being described as the communities, the employees, the citizens that businesses impact on their way to delivering the returns that the market is looking for. The second topic will cover the Build Back Better initiative and what that will likely mean to our cities and municipalities. And the third, we'll get into some tangible examples of this concept of purchasing with purpose and understanding that achieving that is tied directly to what gets measured, gets managed, which can move us all towards a carbon neutral future. And for those of us who've seen the change in climate in the Pacific Northwest, certainly, hopefully start to stem some of the issues that we're all facing. So, and this is a perfect segue, we are all living this, but the numbers are staggering, and we've reached a code red for humanity is what is coming out from the IPCC. 1 in 3 Americans experienced a weather disaster this summer. We can just stop and think about that for a moment. That is a staggering statistic. More than 32% of Americans live in a county or state that has been declared a disaster area by FEMA this summer. And you can see in the graph that's shown how rapidly this has been increasing just in the past few years. This is blaringly loud and clear to the financial community, who makes decisions on the investments that they make based on risk management and overall financial performance, both of which are directly impacted by what's happening to our climate. A way to think about this is climate risk management is meeting the world of stock market valuation. For the past 20 years, there has been an investment focus with the terminology ESG, which stands for environment, social, and governance. And environment, social, and governance are basically 3 ways of trying to aggregate, report on, quantify what organizations are doing that have an impact from an environmental responsibility standpoint in the way they produce their products and deliver their services, a social impact from the standpoint of diversity, equity, inclusion, and then what kind of operating practices are they deploying in order to address both environment and social. And over the past 20 years, there has been some remarkable analysis done to be able to see the performance of companies who are invested heavily in ESG initiatives relative to those who haven't. And I'll talk about that now, which is the links that 20 years of analysis have been able to deliver. So ESG, which is covering environmental, social, and governance initiatives, taps into every one of these points that is around the circle of corporate performance. It impacts, obviously, environment. It impacts productivity as well. The health and well-being, as well as the shared value system of today's workforce, is a key factor in employee recruiting, retention, and engagement. The investment initiatives that organizations are making need to be those that reflect an understanding of what climate change is doing. And we're all facing it in terms of disruption to our supply chain currently, but also for those who've experienced these extreme weather events. We all know what happens when suddenly the weather outside, the climate outside, the hazards, that traumatic events that happen disrupt business process. And that, of course, ties directly into the costs of what it takes to run a business. Regulation, which is the role of local, state, and federal government in terms of what's expected of organizations and what they're expected to disclose, what they're expected to track, report on, initiatives that they're meant to put in place. All of those are factors that affect corporate performance. And of course, the strategy that an organization implements that recognizes the risk-reward association of environmental and social governance practices ties into corporate performance, and then certainly revenue opportunities. and the ability for organizations to differentiate themselves as a result of their environmental and social responsibility leadership, not to mention the incredible innovation that we are seeing out there in the business community. So one of the hallmarks of what's happening goes back directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. And Gary Gensler, who's the chairman of the SEC, is being followed actively in terms of what his statements are on his Twitter account. And the reason for this is because publicly traded companies have to submit annual reports. They're called 10K, which is a documentation of the financial performance of that company over the annual period. What will become part of that required reporting are ESG elements. What is anticipated, but not yet final, are Scope 1 and Scope 2 carbon emissions. And what that means in a very simplistic way is the emissions associated with the energy that is used to run an operation within its own four walls. Scope 3 carbon emissions is looking further into the supply chain and the products and services that are associated with enabling that business to deliver its products and services. The second element that will be part of this is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a recognition that, again, companies who have been at the forefront of this are outperforming their competitive set. And we know, unfortunately, given what's happened over the past year and a half, that there are some huge problems that need to be solved in our business sector that tie directly to a lack of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives by organizations. And the third is, what is the degree of risk that a business is subject to as a result of a changing climate? So what is happening is the SEC will issue a ruling that is coming out in the next in the coming weeks, and that ruling will be subject to a year of interpretation and refinement. And a year from the issue of the ruling will actually become a new regulation for reporting company earnings to the SEC, which in fact will require audit and verification from organizations like the PricewaterhouseCoopers, KPMGs, Ernst & Young's, Deloitte's, and so on. So I'm going to zero in on one particular industry. This is the industry that we work in. It is also an industry that every one of us can relate to, whether you are participating in this as a consumer or whether you are participating in this in a business. The real estate, the built environment, is an enormous contributor to global carbon emissions, representing over 40% of the contribution. And that is a reflection of the carbon that's associated with the building and construction and furnishing and operation of all of our buildings, whether that be for hotels or hospitals or offices or shops or schools or what have you. So there is $103 trillion of assets worldwide are mandating reporting. And an asset is basically, in this particular case, defined as these huge organizations, the BlackRocks, the Blackstones of the world, and so on, public CalPERS funds and the like, that have amassed capital for the purposes of giving a return to investors. And they are deploying that capital through the built environment, investing in various real estate efforts. And that mandate in reporting can be looked at in three ways. One of which is, what are the rules? And these are organizations such as SASB. SASB stands for the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. It is a sister to FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board. FASB is the framework that all publicly traded companies have to follow in order to comply with the reporting to the SEC, and it is what the public accounting firms audit. So there's SASB, there's the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, and then there's TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So those are the rules. The second group is self-reporting, These are voluntary disclosure frameworks. The CDP is the Carbon Disclosure Project, and that is a framework where companies can report out on their carbon footprints associated with their operations. They report on the facilities that they're choosing, the operations that they're choosing. It's voluntary. GRES is the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, and then there's the Dow Jones Sustainability Indices. These are some of the frameworks that are utilized by the investment community to determine whether publicly traded companies are on the journey and making great progress when it comes to environmental and social responsibility. The sea change that is here is in the credit ratings, if you will, right? We all have credit scores as consumers. And that's these are third-party aggregators that are pulling in both information that has been voluntarily disclosed as well as information that they can find in the public domain. And they are issuing ratings of corporations, publicly traded corporations, as well as privately held, in terms of what their performance looks like through the lens of ESG, empowering those who are investing in these organizations to make more informed decisions based upon the risk and the return associated with their actions when it comes to ESG. This is some groundbreaking news to share. The banking industry, and particularly the big six that we see here, Bank of America, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and Wells Fargo, have all committed to net zero financed carbon projects by 2050. What that means is that every use of capital, whether it's for equity purposes, investment purposes, or if it's lending purposes, will be evaluated through the lens of the impact that it's making from a net carbon zero standpoint. This is because they have understood that as an industry or sector, there are 700 times more emissions associated with the loans that they make than with whatever they're doing in their own operations. And they recognize that as providers of capital to all sectors of the economy, they're in a very powerful role to influence change and accountability of all types of business, of all sizes. And so you'll see huge organizations like Cerberus Capital that are producing environmental social governance impact reports. And there will be much more of this and much more quantitative data that the lending officers, investment officers associated with all of these banks are going to be evaluating as they're making decisions on the investments and lending that they're doing. This is really a sea change for all of us because, as we like to say, follow the money. And when the money is leading in this direction, you know that the things are changing. So now let's move on to what does this, what is happening from the standpoint of government sector, and what kind of impact are we looking at from the standpoint of the initiatives underway at the federal level and how that ultimately will impact what's happening in our local communities. There is recognition amongst the Biden administration that purchasing and what's happening in the supply chain is a very, very powerful tool to drive innovation and to really address the climate change challenges, the diversity, equity, inclusion challenges, overall the environmental and social responsibility challenges that we all face. So there was an executive order that was issued to tackle the climate crisis both at home and abroad as a result of a number of initiatives that have been put in place. The first of which is a national climate task force that is comprehensive to cover all federal agencies of the US government as well as state, local, tribal governments. And that is combined with the White House Council on Environmental Quality that includes the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council and the Environmental Justice Interagency Council. This one is a very interesting perspective. The perspective of environmental justice recognizes that unfortunately, there will be certain communities, certain populations that will be more affected than others as a result of what's happening in climate change. And they tend to be those communities that are underserved, don't have the access already to some of the same opportunities that exist in other communities, whether that be to pollution-free zones, fair housing, things of that nature. So as part of this overall initiative is an understanding, frankly, that the cost of cleaning up from the climate change disruption events is absolutely staggering. And a big cost of that is associated with communities that have not been well served. And if those communities can be strengthened and made more resilient, it's going to help reduce the overall costs that we're all facing as a result of climate change. But concurrent with that, the first ever initiative has been put in place with the GSA and all of the federal buildings across all of the agencies to create a new approach to buildings and renovations in the federal government that addresses both environmental and social responsibility. And that effort is designed to be a blueprint for what can be happening at local communities. And that will include a significant amount of data and analytics that goes into the design, building, construction, and especially renovation of the buildings that we all spend 90% of our time in. A way to think about how all of this is integrated together is we have, starting from the left-hand side, these global reporting standards, as shared before, SASB, GRI, and TCFD, they're determining what's being measured, right? Then the second leg to this is now that that has been clarified and there's alignment behind that, then it's the impact reporting that is being required of all companies. And we're not only seeing this in the public markets, but many, many companies out there are venture-backed or private equity-backed. And though the funds for private equity and venture come from funds who have a high priority around ESG. And literally, I had a conversation today with a building products manufacturer who is owned by a private equity company. And that private equity company said, we are at risk of not being able to get more investment dollars if we don't change the diversity, equity, inclusion profile of our organization and those of the businesses that we're invested in. That's really powerful, again, when the money talks. So we're going to see much more happening as a result of the impact reporting requirements that, again, are aligned with these global reporting standards. So once those impact reporting goals are being set, now the next step is you have to be able to produce the data and analytics that can go into that impact reporting. And that's where the C-suite and business unit leaders come in. Their responsibility is to determine what business practice changes do they need to be making? What are they doing already? And how well are they performing relative to the expectations of stakeholders, public markets, government, and consumers, frankly. So then as we take that all the way down to the folks that are in the business units that are doing the work, and again, we take the built environment as an example, this means that folks who are responsible for choosing products that go into our interiors, and this can be true of you in your own homes, but certainly there's a huge business out there that goes into the design and renovation work that is constantly around us, material selection, right? And what is the story of all of those products? The flooring, the wall coverings, the lighting, the seating, the fabrics, the case goods, the televisions, all of these products are part of a supply chain that has the ability to make changes in the way in which they produce products such that they can have a positive impact in terms of environmental and social responsibility. So let's dive into a little bit further about what we mean when we talk about the ESG criteria. Environmental covers a range of topics. It's looking at everything from the material choices in terms of raw material sourcing, the use of pre or post-consumer recycled materials instead of virgin raw materials. Recyclability and circularity is the concept that we do away with the notion of throwaway or waste, right? I mean, it's ironic. There is no such concept in nature. Every product, every aspect of nature in its journey through its cycle of life, serves as a byproduct and a support system for other aspects of how nature works. We can do the same thing in all the products that we utilize to live our daily lives and bring a regenerative or circularity approach. And you see this in some ways in terms of this concept of, instead of buying things, it's renting things, right? Instead of everybody having their own car, there's a shared car service and things of that nature. It doesn't mean that we have to go back to living in caves at all. It just means rethinking this concept of all of us operating in the ways that we have, which assumes that our resources are endless and that there is no negative impact of landfills. And we know that that's not the case. The next is avoidance of toxic chemicals. We spend 90% of our time indoors. There is a correlation between the exposure that we have to the products in our businesses, our homes, our schools, and so on, to the health of people and the health of the planet. The biodiversity is recognizing the need to protect and preserve the different plant life and species out there, and to be mindful of the impact of the types of products that are being made from them, and the focus on rapidly renewable, sustainably harvested, and the like. And then embodied carbon, which is probably one of the most important factors here, looks at what is the energy source that is utilized to bring a product to market. Is it based on coal and oil, or is it utilizing renewable resources, solar, wind, hydro, and so on? So an example in the built environment is creating, building and furnishing spaces where you're using materials such as those that are FSC certified and made with recovered or reclaimed materials, or product that is made with pre and post consumer recycled content, manufactured in a facility that's powered by solar energy. This is all information that is available to designers and contractors and consumers to factor into the decisions as to the products you buy. When we look at social responsibility, we are looking at diversity, equity, inclusion. We're looking at labor management, data privacy and security, community relations, like recruiting, retention from employees, and then customer satisfaction. All of these are social measures, and that all of which impact the performance of a business. And again, those too can be measured. So under the umbrella of diversity, equity, inclusion, it's not only looking at, are there assurance of fair labor practices and human rights in manufacturing practices and throughout the supply chain, but also it's looking at the efforts to ensure minority, women-owned, LGBTQ, and so on representation in the purchasing of products, as well as looking at local sourcing, right? What can we be doing to support our local communities and the economies that come from a local workforce. And finally, the G. The simple way of explaining the G are the particular operating practices, policies, and values that exist in an organization that provide for the ability for the E and the S to happen successfully. What we are seeing out there, and again, as consumers listening in on this call, knowing this about these organizations is really powerful and hopefully impacts your choice of who you do business with or buy products from. So seeing governance and process is updates to what are called brand standards to support the environmental and social responsibility initiatives around the design of the spaces that we shop in. So not to mention the products themselves. And any one of these companies are in the process now of making changes to the criteria by which they evaluate the products that they choose and the design and construction that goes into the spaces that we all have frequented heavily in the past and hope to be doing more so as we get beyond this pandemic. So that leads into the third aspect of this, what happens when you purchase with purpose. So this is an example of a real project. This happens to be a very well-known global pharmaceutical company. They have office and research facilities nationwide, and they set goals to say, We want interiors that are going to support our environmental and social governance initiatives. That includes things like the use of products made from recycled materials, products that are free of toxins that help improve indoor air quality, reduction in carbon emissions in the manufacturing and shipping distribution aspect of a product's life cycle, production practices that follow the highest standards for fair labor and human rights, reducing waste through the use of less packaging, and then the ability for products to be recyclable, reused, taken back by the manufacturer, and repurposed, as opposed to ending up in a landfill, because renovations of interiors happen at an unbelievably rapid pace. I heard today it's as little as every 3 years, particularly for office space. Renovations are happening, and unfortunately, the typical approach is the contractors come in, they pull everything out, it ends up in the landfill, new product is brought in. You can think about, the embodied carbon footprint that's associated with all of the renovations that occur in the built environment is as great, if not greater, than the exterior building itself with its steel and concrete and so on. So in order to adhere to the changes that have occurred from Wall Street and the White House administration, we're now seeing a new era of decision tools to guide purchasing choices. And it's here for consumers now in certain product categories, and will be coming much more rapidly as in the coming months and years. And that's the ability that when you're looking at a chair, you're not just looking at its shape and its style and its color and its comfort, but you're also looking at, in essence, a nutrition label or an ingredient label equivalent, right? What is the impact of that chair in terms of the materials, packaging, what you do with the product at the end of its use, and as well as diversity and equity inclusion. In addition, the embodied carbon story. This is incredibly powerful because knowing this information can help all of us buy better. And there's nothing like the almighty dollar and the choice of where to put that to drive change and action. So you can see that having data in this format enables a very clear understanding of which product would be a better choice in terms of the percentage of sustainable materials, the reduction in packaging, an alternative to it ending up in the landfill when it's being when it's done with its useful life, adherence to fair labor practices and human rights, and then the embodied carbon story relative to other upholstered chairs. What we are doing at MindClick is we are working with all kinds of organizations in hospitality and healthcare and workplace and senior living and retail and education to produce what we call project impact reports. And those reports enable the design and purchasing teams and the brands, the owners that are behind this, to understand what the performance is of the products that they're choosing, and have tools that can help them make better choices and be able to quantify the impact at a project by project level. This can then be reported out through the different self-reporting bodies that I shared earlier, which then in turn can be used by investors to understand the leadership that organizations are taking in order to drive the change that we need for a carbon neutral future. So this is an example of being able to tell the story across products that have been chosen for a particular space, and get an understanding of the positive impact or not that's associated with products. And we look at it both in terms of materials, we look at it in terms of various direct impacts associated with reducing carbon emissions, and we're actually able to get to this quantitative measure to say what's the difference between signage suppliers in this example, where we can
Joanna,
see.
Joanna, sorry,
Yep.
I hate to interrupt, but we're cutting short on time to move over to
Perfect.
Stacey. So if
Last
you can,
slide.
thank you.
This is, yep, thank you, John. So this provides an example showing that for a product manufactured in Pennsylvania versus products manufactured in 2 states with a heavier dependence on fossil fuels, you can see the magnitude, and the lower number is the better number of the embodied carbon of this product. That information then gets shared from an impact reporting standpoint, goes into the ratings of organizations, which then ultimately ties it back to the Wall Street, to government, to Main Street. And with that, I had the order backwards, John, I'm sorry. We'll turn it over to Stacey to talk about what the City of Portland is doing.
Yeah, and let me jump in with a quick housekeeping note for everybody. Please feel free to drop in some questions into the general chat or directly to me if you prefer. And now we're going to hand it over to Stacey to give a little introduction to herself and then show her presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stacey Foreman. I'm the Sustainable Procurement Program Manager with the City of Portland, Oregon. And I'm going to talk about our approach for building demand for low-embodied carbon materials using partnerships and procurement. So just big picture in terms of framing this work at the city, we have a variety of tools in our toolkit for addressing the climate emergency. Many of them are driven by policies passed by our city council. And we have many best practices being integrated into our project and service approaches. One of these is our sustainable procurement policy, which does have a greenhouse gas reduction focus, which is in turn driving our work on embodied carbon. But before I dive into a specific example, I want to talk a bit about how we came to prioritize embodied carbon and on particular materials. So in terms of our prioritization approach, this really stemmed from our 2016 Sustainable Supply Chain Analysis. That analysis confirmed for us that greenhouse gases are our largest supply chain environmental impact, and that in fact it's much larger than our city's Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions. And when we dive deeper into these greenhouse gas emissions, construction is the single, in terms of a single category, construction is our largest sector contributing to those greenhouse gases in our supply chain. So when we go further into what that means in terms of where to focus our work in construction, we took a look at what kind of construction work we do. We do all kinds of construction, but in terms of the most frequent and most consistent, it's a lot of infrastructure work. But one thing that all of these things have in common is that they use concrete. So we decided to look further into the use of concrete as a starting point. Concrete is a highly greenhouse gas intensive product, mostly from the cement production. And if you weren't already familiar with this, the cement sector is the third largest industrial energy consumer and second largest industrial CO2 emitter globally. It's very greenhouse gas intensive. We also use a lot of concrete. It's directly within our control in terms of what we specify. So there's lots of opportunities for change. And there are lower embodied carbon options available now. And we hope that our decisions to start focusing on lower embodied carbon options will influence the market and our community. So as I alluded to, cement is where concrete's carbon footprint really comes from. A lot of it is driven by that cement manufacturing. Thus, our opportunities to reduce our carbon footprint of concrete really focus on reducing or optimizing our use of cement, not using more than we need for performance reasons. We can use cement alternatives, also known as supplemental cementitious materials, or SCMs. We can also source lower impact cements. Type 1L cement is one example. Also cement from more efficient plants. And then there's some other technologies currently available, but also still not as common, is CO2 mineralization and CO2 sequestering. One great thing, as I mentioned before, in terms of lower carbon footprint options already being available, you see that a lot in both the Type 1L cement and the SCMs. Common SCMs you may have already heard of are like fly ash and slag. So all that led to the development of the Low Carbon Concrete Initiative, which I'll spend the rest of our time talking about. It is a procurement approach. It applies only to city construction projects. This doesn't affect private sector projects in the city. And it has 3 key phases. The first one really about getting market and baseline data about our own carbon footprints, getting field data, and developing carbon thresholds. So that first one regarding getting baseline data, really understanding what kind of mixes we use, what applications are affected, how that plays into our standard construction specs, also understanding the current market, what are the mixes commonly produced in our area, what kind of supplemental cementitious materials are available in lieu of 100% cement. And then also we needed to get data about the carbon footprint of these mixes. So that was something that wasn't common practice before this. And so we started requiring environmental product declarations in the beginning of 2020 to really get at that carbon footprint data on a per mix basis. And that is expressed as the global warming potential. The next phase is really about understanding how these mixes perform on site, address a lot of questions from project managers and contractors about any changes in concrete mixes. And then the last phase is to establish an embodied carbon threshold. And this is a multi-stakeholder process that is currently underway. And I'll get to talk a little bit more about this in a little bit. One thing I really want to stress, since part of our theme of our discussion today is about partnerships and working public-private partnerships, is that this really is a collaborative approach. This is interdepartmental. I couldn't do this work without all the great folks in our various departments that utilize concrete. They're all involved in this. I have a great partnership with the materials management team at Oregon DEQ, which their expertise in low carbon materials and embodied carbon is extremely helpful. We have a variety of contractors and concrete suppliers lending their expertise in the pilot test, as well as in the multi-stakeholder group that is developing the carbon thresholds. So you'll hear me talk a lot more about these last 2 points moving forward. So real quick about the pilot test, so you can kind of understand all the different inputs going into this and why these partnerships are so valuable, is the pilot test goals are to compare multiple lower carbon concrete mixes against 100% cement mixes. And again, we're trying to understand technical performance, workability, price impacts, schedule impacts, and also understand what kind of carbon reduction benefits we can get. And it involves quite a few stakeholders. So stakeholders involved to date, as I mentioned, working with a lot of our departments here at the city, primarily though, our transportation department and our materials testing labs have been involved all along and have been great partners throughout. And we to date have been working on these pilot tests with 3 concrete suppliers, 5 concrete construction firms, and as I mentioned, also Oregon DEQ has been a great partner on some of the research and analysis and networking. And this is valuable because it really lends multiple perspectives, expertise, and helps facilitate buy-in. We're doing a variety of pilot tests, and most of these are underway, but the sidewalk ramps and corners is one that I'll focus on in the next 2 slides because it is complete and we have published a case study on that one already. However, just noting that we are testing different mixes on different applications to truly try to understand and address a variety of stakeholder questions and concerns. So the thing about the pilot test that we've completed on the sidewalk curbs is that concrete finisher interviews did not raise any concerns. We had pricing was the same or less for the lower carbon mixes. And so far, our post-work site inspections haven't raised any concerns either in terms of mixed performance. The main difference we really saw was between the 100% cement and lower carbon mixes in terms of early strength gain. And all mixes, however, performed as specified. And then, however, they were actually a little bit over-designed, and I'll explain that a bit more in a moment. So these are the results from our compression strength testing that we had completed on all the mixes that were poured in this pilot test. And our specification is that they have to be 3,000 PSI by day 28. That's our standard spec for this application. And you can see that all of them achieve that tremendously by day 20. In fact, they were, kind of in this 5,000 and above mark, right? So that's what I meant by over design. There's opportunity here to actually reduce the cement level. And then what I mentioned before about difference in early strength gain is really visualized here, which is, again, we have the slag mixes in this case, which are the lower carbon footprint mixes in green, and not starting off at as high of a strength level as their 100% counterparts. So again, that's what we mean by the difference in early strength. However, there is a very also big difference in the carbon footprint of these mixes, such that the lower carbon mixes lowered the carbon footprint of an average size block ramp by 23 to 34%, just depending again on the range of amount of slag used in the mix. So the higher the slag content, the greater the global warming potential reduction or the reduction in embodied carbon. So if you want more details about this case study, I know I went through that really quickly. There's a case study published online that you can view at your leisure. But I want to move on now to the work we're doing with the embodied carbon thresholds. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a multi-stakeholder committee working on this. Their goal is to develop recommendations to the city on what those thresholds should be, including implementation recommendations. And these thresholds really need to be meaningful. So that's why we have been gathering all this data in the first couple of phases. We want to make sure that the targets we set and the thresholds that we set will result in a meaningful reduction. Yet they still need to balance that meaningful reduction with being feasible, and that they still need to perform as needed. And we also want to take into account equity considerations. We do not want to set recommendations that exclude any stakeholders, and we want to make sure that these thresholds are feasible for a variety of operations, whether it's contractors or the suppliers, and that we develop implementation strategies that factor all these things in. So going again back to this kind of this focus on partnerships and how this process has really gained value from these partnerships, is that engineers and architects and our project managers and our standard construction specs all determine what kind of mixes are required on different projects, right? But they can learn a lot from the concrete suppliers, because the concrete suppliers know what's available to them. They know how to do different mixes depending on what the requirements are, both performance and lower carbon. Having these conversations between these partners can really help us all better understand how to optimize those mixes. And then the contractors, it helps them be in these conversations, and we can learn from them what their concerns are about using different mixes, how it might impact their how they finish, how long they need to protect the surface. If there's a change in early strength, maybe they need to keep a blanket on it, or keep it from traffic being on it in any sort of way for a longer period of time. And then how does that affect project schedules, which again is another project manager concern, right? And then we have material experts that can help us really understand the embodied carbon side of things, and what technologies might be coming on front, and how meaningful those other technologies are in terms of contributing to reducing the embodied carbon footprint. We also keep needing to demonstrate performance. So, and our material testing experts need to understand what we're trying to do in terms of driving this change as well. So all of these stakeholders blend their expertise, which help us really develop meaningful and actionable recommendations. So just looking forward, we have, as I mentioned, additional pilot tests in the works. We will be publishing more case studies on those as we finalize them. And we hope to have committee recommendations by November. But I'd also just like to highlight that because of those stakeholder conversations and engaging these different, that public-private partnership aspect and collaboration, we're already starting to see local market shifts. We're seeing an increase in availability of concrete EPDs. We're seeing an increase in availability of type 1L cement. And we're seeing an increase in awareness of concrete and greenhouse gas emissions connections. So I hope that the presentation lended some insight about our work on embodied carbon materials, as well as how that's being driven by these robust partnerships and how it's creating some meaningful results. Thank you for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you, Stacey. Thank you, Joanna. That was great. Tons of information. I'm going to start off with some questions that we've been collecting throughout. We've got 8 to 10 minutes or so for questions here for folks. The first question is for Stacey. Have any contractors been reluctant to use lower carbon concrete? Isn't it more expensive? What have you found? Any pushback from contractors?
Not to date. Like I said, it's been a very collaborative approach in terms of our pilot projects. It has not been more expensive also to date in our pilot projects, those lower carbon mixes. Although it's like any other commodity, it will, inputs and the pricing can change just depending on market conditions, right? So, but all in all, no, we haven't seen any big price differences in terms of the mixes themselves. Where we might see any potential pricing differences is more on the finishing side. If a particular surface needs to be protected for a longer period of time, that has to reach strength, take longer to reach strength, then yeah, that might cause contractors to spend a little more time on an area.
And any sort of concerns on their end, or is that sort of a time and materials issue for them, so they don't really gripe too much?
I think most of the current is just learning. Like they want to know from these pilot tests, learn what this situation is and work with it. They just need the information so that they can price accordingly their jobs and know what to expect.
Yeah, good, great, thank you. Second question for Joanna. So you mentioned Wells Fargo and Bank of America, big supporters historically of fossil fuel projects. How are they, if they are changing any investment decisions related to those projects? And have they made any, they or other large financial institutions made any public statements about this? And you're muted, just so you know, Joanna, if you're still with us.
Should we move on to another question until Joanna unmutes?
Sure. I was asked a question about dealing with the denier personas and how we tend to do, any advice on how to engage with them. I think the most important thing to know is to not ignore them. They are at least where I am, they're a very vocal minority. And so including them in the dialogue and making sure that they are being heard. Honestly, we get great feedback and ideas from them. And more importantly, when we engage with them, a lot of times in these roundtable exercises or one-on-one interviews, we're actually able to sort of get them further down the road. Once we start hearing what their true objectives are. Most of the time it is simple, most of the time the pushback is a lot just on governmental overreach. So there's this sort of baked in ideology that if they start disclosing, their energy consumption, that they are going to, then the government is going to use that data to start taxing them more in some way, right? And so once we can sort of start talking about community impact and some deeper issues, we can actually push and prod them along. But I would say the first mistake is to ignore them and not include them in the dialogue. Joanna, you are back. Did you hear my question?
I did, yes. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I'll give you two examples. We are actually working on a renovation of the Park Central San Francisco hotel, which is going to be a Grand Hyatt. It will open in early next year. And we are producing impact reporting for that project. And we're asked to present it to Morgan Stanley, who is the equity partner on the project. They're put the money up for the project. And we had a call that 10 bankers were on for Morgan Stanley from all over, including the global head of hospitality. That's never happened before in 10 years of work that we've been doing in this space. If you go to Cerberus and you look at their reporting, they are detailing out specific environmental and social impacts on their projects. While they're not a bank, they're certainly a huge investor and owner of buildings, all different kinds of buildings, and they partner with the banks for the capital that goes into them. So what we're seeing is not just the words out there and the pledges that are being made, but we're actually seeing involvement in projects, requests for data and analytics to support the ESG initiative, and a massive amount of hiring being done of students that are coming out with degrees in environmental and social responsibility and lots of number crunching. So they're pretty real in terms of the initiatives we're seeing from the banking sector.
Great, that's exciting. So I've got another question I'm gonna throw out to the both of you. It was answered a little bit in the chat, but there might be some nuances to it. So I'm gonna elevate it up. So that question is, Wall Street Journal recently noted that China is reducing electricity production to meet its clean air goals, and is impacting the production of solar panels, because 80% of the solar panels used in the US are currently made in China using fossil energy, primarily coal. Would the manufacturing of solar panels from China be a factor in reporting embodied carbon?
This is Joanna. The short answer is yes. What I will say on this is that it's a journey, and there's no perfect, right? There's process, and there's progress that is made, in some cases bit by bit, in other cases it happens at a faster rate. The challenge that is always going to be at the table, and has been raised in this conversation, is the balance between cost and the transformation to an economy that is off oil. And so it's going to take some fits and starts, and we are going to have contradictions where, yes, the solar panels that are going on buildings are manufactured, and the manufacturing of that is coal-fired. So it's going to take a lot of collective forces to make progress. But, you know, I just want to really make the point, there is no perfect, but there is progress, and we need to focus on those things that are going to help us get there as efficiently and cost-effectively as possible.
Right.
Yeah, if I could just quickly add, though, that if you're a consumer and you want to try to compare the embodied carbon of different solar panels products, you can do that by asking them to provide you an EPD. And that if you ask for a product-specific EPD as opposed to one that is produced at an industry-wide level, you can capture that information in terms of what kind of energy is being used to manufacture those solar panels. And also you can look for EPEAT registered solar panels in terms of looking at the life cycle impacts of solar panels.
Great, awesome, thank you, Stacey. So, all right, we're at the end of our time here, unfortunately. So what I'm going to encourage people to do is reach out to any of the participants if they have further questions. Email us. I think all of our contact information was in the presentation, or perhaps the organizers can get that out to people. So I'm going to hand this back over to Diane if she's got any closing remarks, but I want to thank the panelists and thank all of you for showing up and doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much, all of you. Great presentation and great questions too. I wish we had more time. But I just want to remind everyone, we've just put the link into the chat. We have 8 more webinars coming up, and the next one will be the benefits of managing your power. And this is a webinar for business, government, and individuals. So we hope you'll stick around and register for that Zoom link in that, as we just mentioned earlier. So before we close, we will have a word from 350 Deschutes, and I hope to encourage you to complete the survey that you will receive at the end of this webinar. It will help us get better. Thank you so much for joining us. Hi, I'm Diane Hodiak, Executive Director of 350 Deschutes. We hope you're enjoying the free webinars and we hope to keep our conference free in the future. You can help us by making a gift of $5, $10, $25, $100 or more and visiting 350deschutes.org/donate. And if you do decide to give at the $100 level, we will be including a $20 gift card courtesy of Sun River Brewing. So please donate today at 350deschutes.org/donate. Thank you so much.